Hello and welcome to What Fresh Hell, Laughing in the Face of Motherhood. This is Margaret.
And this is Amy, and today we're discussing something that listeners have specifically asked us to answer for them, which is, does having kids ruin your marriage forever?
I mean, I'm really qualified to answer this because I got married in December and had a baby in September. Like, I never had a marriage without kids. So my marriage may have been ruined by kids, but it was, you know what I mean? Like it's always been my marriage. So it's like, I know some people are like 5 years together, like going out dancing and drinking and like having a ball with their friends. And then a kid comes along and ruins it.
Right.
My life was just ruined in general by marriage and kids simultaneously.
And by marriage, just to keep the lens very wide, we mean relationships, we mean parenting partners, we mean same-sex relationships. And there's some research that suggests that for a woman married to a man, which is the case for both of us, that things might get even a little bit more intense for reasons that we'll discuss. But yeah, does it have to be bad forever? And here's how this came up. We had a recent episode, I forget even which one it was, a recent episode where we talked about our old partners at the daycare joke that we've been talking about for 7 years now.
Angry partners at the daycare. That was my marriage for several years.
Yeah, after becoming that you move from people who really enjoy spending time together. I love his sense of humor. He's a great dancer, and now you're just angry partners at the 24/7 daycare. And
correct.
Do you get back from that? And I've given this advice before in the podcast which was advice that I received. I even put it in my first book. It was a friend of my husband's. His name is Scott. My husband was talking about not how he couldn't stand me, but just how it was a lot. You know, the blender of life with little kids is a lot. And this guy said it's the lost decade. It's about a decade. You're not really going to talk to your wife about anything besides, who's throwing up for about a decade.
Poop consistency.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
12, 10 years.
The lost decade. And if you can just hang on for about a decade, it'll get better after that. Just know that it's coming. And I feel like that is, in some ways, really helpful to know it is about a decade of your life being really run by something besides, what do you feel like doing tonight? That sentence is not going to come out of your mouth for about 10 years, but someday it will again. It doesn't have to be forever.
I think if that sounds horrendous to you because you have little kids right now, I think you could argue for 5 years, for a 5-year window. But then, you have a couple more kids and it kind of extends. So I guess the decade is because I had 3 kids in 4 years. So the baby turning 5, I still had a 2-year-old, right? So I guess it is about a decade.
I mean, it can't be right if you have multiple kids. Yeah. And I think I also give this advice all the time in different sort of, arenas, that there's not worrying about it and then there's ignoring it. And those don't mean the same thing. So when I say it's the lost decade, it's about a decade that your kids come before your relationship with your parenting partner. And it's okay. It's kind of how it goes. It doesn't mean don't walk in that garden for 10 years and, pull up some weeds once in a while. There is maintenance work to be done.
And don't settle into a no romance hatred and be oh, this will only be a decade. You can't get so far off the rails that you have lost track of the road.
Not worrying about it and not doing anything about it are not the same thing.
But I do think, and I have given this advice in other contexts, is that I think I learned this on the podcast, but one of the things I try to say when people are having a hard time now is, that sounds really hard. That's as hard as it sounds. It's as hard as you think it is, just validating the hardness of it, because I do think that the whole, I mean, I love Disney as much as the next person, but I do kind of giggle at the Disney wedding. It's you're pulling up in the Cinderella carriage, and the dude is dressed as a prince, and you're at the Disney castle, getting married. And I just think, I hope y'all realize how far away from this marriage really is.
Right.
They do not show the scene in Cinderella where Cinderella is screeching at the prince for leaving his dirty socks in the kitchen, and there's 3 crying babies in the background. And the prince is well, I have a work trip, sorry.
Right.
they skipped that part of the movie, and let me tell you, it's coming for you after your Disney-themed wedding.
The I need 6 eggs lady from Beauty and the
I
Beast.
need 6 eggs!
She's an extra, right? And
Yeah,
then you're
yeah.
living her life.
There's a
and not-
great meme, just in case you don't know Amy's reference, that it says, "I thought I was this person," and it's Belle,
right?
singing like, "Oh, I want out of this
I want
provincial
to adventure in the
town."
great wide somewhere.
Yes. And then in the background, there's a woman screeching, "I need 6 eggs." And you're like, I think I'm Belle, but I need 6
Yes.
6 eggs lady. And yeah, that's the problem with the like, I am
You're-
Cinderella to your Prince Charming. And then you're like, no, I need 6 eggs lady to your like, ugly butcher in the background.
Not here right now, right? That's
Yeah.
which is why I'm freaking out. So
They don't
You're
have
very-
that theme wedding.
no,
You're not
exactly.
able to put a kerchief and an
Why do
apron
I
on
always
and
have to
get
pick up
married.
the kids from
Yeah.
daycare and get them? Yeah. So this is very common. There is a marriage researcher, Dr. Brian Doss, and he published a study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology where he studied married couples that had been married for 8 to 10 years, which is you're sort of halfway through the last decade at that point, right? Like you get married, have a couple of kids, like they're in it. They're not in maybe newborn stage, but they're in the tough years that we're talking about. 90% of the people surveyed in this survey said they felt less happy in their relationship after having children than they had before. 90%. Basically.
Yeah, I mean, no, who are those 10%? That's all I
Right.
want to know. That's the only mystery of that
They
statistic to
have
me.
one nanny for every kid. That's who those 10% of people
Those
are.
people are
maybe.
miserable, though. Believe me, I knew some of
They're
them in
not
LA. They are not happy. I mean, I had never met a person who had 9 nannies who was happy. I'm just gonna say they may be out there, but I did not meet them in LA. Yeah, I mean, my husband and I would occasionally be like in it so badly and like fighting and a nightmare, and the kid had just found the Sharpie and the dinner was burnt and someone was coming to stay and the house looked like absolute like a robbery had occurred and they'd tossed the place, and we would occasionally look at each other and say, some people do this to save their marriages. Some people do this to bring them closer together. Like,
right.
wow, that's a bad plan.
That was, yeah. What are those people saying right now?
Yeah. They're like, wow, there's a great line in a chorus line, "Everything is Beautiful" at the ballet, where she's telling the story of her parents. And they had her to save their marriage. And then the father says, well, I thought this was going to help, but I guess it's not. And yeah, I think it's misguided.
Well, all right. So within these studies, there's been more than one study. And guess what? People who are in the lost decade in the slog of angry partners at the daycare report being less happy than they used to be. But out of the people who are happy, out of the people who are less happy than they used to be, the least happy of the unhappy are mothers in heterosexual relationships. They're below women in same-sex relationships, and they're below all the dudes. The mothers.
All the dudes. This
Like,
surprises me not
everywhere.
at all, because
Right.
I do think that in a same-sex relationship, the default gender roles, you have to actually discuss them. Like, you actually have to have a conversation at some point about who's going to do what. And I think the default ruts are not as deep in same-sex relationships. That would be
Right.
my assumption of why
From
that's
the
true.
outside, right? Right. But and of course, if you're breastfeeding, then you have to get up. You do the night wakings. You are more tired, and we're going to talk about that too, why that matters. And then that just becomes we're the only one that can calm the baby down. The baby wants you, and you just become the only person who knows how to do the things. And then I think that gets put on you and like you're maternal gatekeeping. Like, no, you're not. You just get the baby handed right back to you every time something isn't perfect because you're the only one who knows how to do it, says the person who doesn't really want to hold the crying baby anymore.
I mean, I had such like rage clarity, if I might coin a term, after having probably my 3rd kid in 4 years. I just kept saying to my husband, your life hasn't changed at all.
Yeah.
Your body is not damaged. Your sleep cycle is like, yeah, a little bit more interrupted than it used to be. His work schedule, and I will say, like, it's not because he's a jerk. It's because he had a very demanding job with a company that is from another country, that did not based in another country, where the idea of parental leave was ridiculous. And, it was not part of the company culture that dads would take any kind of paternity leave. I mean, I had my first baby on a Friday. My husband went back to work full time on a Monday. And his full time work was he left at 8 in the morning and he came home at 7 o'clock at night. I mean, it was brutal. And I will say, my husband was not a guy who was like, and I'm going to go for beers with the guys. Like, he would rush home. He felt bad. He made a whole thing that Saturday mornings he would always take the kids out. I mean, he tried really hard, but I was gobsmacked by, I don't know why I didn't see it coming, that, oh my gosh, your life last week and this week are 90% the same.
Yes.
My life last week and this week are 1000% different.
I had the exact same experience of like, wait a minute, right? Esther Perel, you know who she is? She's a relationships psychologist and, talks very frankly about things that are beyond the purview of this clean rated podcast, but she's excellent. One of the things she talked about was the sort of the 6-week, like, looks like you're ready to go, like business may resume as usual, and how there's a disconnect there.
Right.
And she
Romance.
talked about, and she talked about it in a way I'd never really thought about it, which was the person whose body has not been profoundly altered by this experience really needs to remember that the other person in the relationship, which in the heterosexual relationship is the mother, no matter what kind of birth she had, whether she's breastfeeding or not, like, her body is not the same. She is literally not the same, living in the same body that she was a couple of weeks ago. And that takes time. And there's a disconnect there because the partner, they didn't experience that. So how would they know what that's like? But that's another form of disconnect that falls on the woman more.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's mesmerizing to me, just what a man's involvement is in take relationships completely out of it. What a man's relationship is to creating a child versus what a female's relationship is to creating a child is absolutely insane. It's insane. I remember just like having had a difficult birth and some birth related injuries and everything, and just limping home. And then it's like, oh, and now you feed the baby. It's like, I just don't understand biologically why this would be the way it is. It's like, wait, shouldn't the man breastfeed? That would make so much more sense to me. While I recover from like the most grievous injury I've ever sustained.
Well, because you're lying there anyway. So, why not keep the baby alive too?
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where you just, and you hear about it. It's like, oh, you have a baby, you breastfeed, you this, you that. And then you're doing it and you're like, stop the presses.
Right.
I need to talk to the New York Times. Like, this is insane what's going on here at my house. And why is no one aware of this,
I think we should take a break. When we come back, I'm going to tell you the slightly surprising reason that relationships get so hard after kids that I wasn't totally expecting, that wasn't anything we've discussed yet.
All right.
Okay, so here's why researchers say relationships can really go, downhill in the pre-kids versus post-kids. Your body's different. You don't have time for each other, all the things we've talked about, but it's the lack of sleep. The lack of sleep is the number one reason that your relationship changes so profoundly. And because this leads to other things.
Hashtag that tracks.
Right. It tracks, right?
I will tell you, I was just complaining to Amy before we started recording. I have had a horrible week of sleep for boring reasons. But I am in a rage spiral. Like I'm just like, I'm moving away by myself. I'm becoming a hermit. I'm going to like live on an island because people are terrible. And also, like, I can't pronounce words. And we were trying to record some ads. And I was like, I'm sorry, we need to do a take 17 because for some reason I cannot say the word Tuesday. It's too difficult for me. And I'm talking, I've been getting like 5 to 6 hours of sleep a night, not 2.
Right.
And the way that lack of sleep affects you is so I think it is, and I mean, Ariana Huffington wrote a whole book about this, but that undersleeping, and people sometimes come to me and say, my kid is acting like this. Do you think it's normal? I mean, I'm not a doctor, but because I do a parenting podcast, people think I know a lot about kids. But the number one thing I always say is, first of all, I'm not a doctor. Don't ask me for advice. But how is that kid sleeping? Is
That's
that
what
kid
Lisa D'Amour
getting
says.
11 hours of sleep a night?
Yeah, Lisa D'Amour says that's her first question, and she is an expert.
Yeah, all right.
Where
So
she
I'm
starts.
right. I'm just
Yeah.
like Lisa D'Amour. But that, I think that sometimes, and I know for my own kids that all of my kids will occasionally have a night where I hear them walking around at midnight, and then it's, 7 o'clock, 6:45, wake up for school. And if I thought that that kid, that was their actual personality, it'd be a nightmare. Like they just become monsters when they're underslept. And same.
Yeah. So, all right, Stephanie Wilson at SMU has
No
researched.
relation.
No
No
relation
relation
to
to
me.
Amy Wilson.
No. But she likes research, just like me. So she
So
researched
maybe
the
there is some
relationship.
deep DNA there.
Maybe. So she has researched the relationship between sleep and marital conflict. And guess what? It's highly correlated. She says, see if this tracks for you. What did you say? You were rage spiraling?
I was, I can't remember because I'm too tired,
I think
Amy.
you might have said rage spiraling and rage hyphen something else. I think you're like hyphenating your rage into all kinds of verbs.
Listen,
and
I've got
things.
a lot. I'm like an Eskimo with a million words for snow. I've got a lot of words for rage right now.
Right. You're rage listening to this.
I think it was like a rage reveal, I think, what I was dealing with.
Okay. Dr. Stephanie Wilson says, when you don't sleep well, it's harder to regulate your emotional responses.
Dr. Wilson, you're doing a great job because you're
Yes.
really onto something there.
Yes. And both of you are in that position, right? And that makes it harder to slow down and see, your partner's point of view, to give each other grace about why didn't you, drain the bathtub after you took the baby out and the towels all over the floor. Like it's a little bit harder to give grace. And the worst squabbling, her word, between partners occurs when both partners are sleep deprived.
I mean, maybe I would say that my worst desire to commit husbandicide was that he was not tired. He was not as tired. He could sleep through the baby waking up. I mean, I may have said this on the podcast before, but we lived in LA. We had a long earthquake plan. And our earthquake plan was like, you get the boys, I'll get the girl, we'll meet here, da-da-da. One night, 3 a.m., there's a fairly significant earthquake. And it turned out our actual earthquake plan was like, I run around in my underwear screaming curse words, and he sleeps through the whole thing. And like, my husband could sleep through anything. And so he made an effort to get up with the kid. But again, I was breastfeeding.
Yeah,
and so
they got to come get
what
you.
is he getting up for,
I know.
really?
Like, I'll do the diaper. Like, okay, that's the last 7% of this midnight experience, but okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
so I guess both tired, I get why that would be worse. But for me, like eyeballs bleeding tired and him being like, what's for breakfast? I just would think like, I will end him.
I had a slightly different experience, but my husband is a sounder sleeper than me. He was tired too. Like there were definitely nights when like we were both up because somebody was, had a stomach flu, and then he moved to the couch, and then I continued to be up the rest of the night.
Right.
And in the morning, he would be tired from that like half hour of, cleaning up the bathroom in the middle of the night. But then he got another REM cycle, and I stayed up. So it was like we're both tired, but I'm like in another level of I haven't even dreamed in 4 days, and I'm starting to lose it tired. And he was just regular, really, really tired.
I am hearing the voices.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And he was also tired, but not as tired as I was. And then of course you start scorekeeping, because what else are you going to do when you're up in the middle of the night? And then, then it's, and when one partner is far more tired than the other, do I even need to say which partner that is likely to be?
No, you don't.
I'm going to give you a study. Working mothers in America were shown to be significantly more likely to get up during the night with a sick or wakeful child than working fathers.
Oh, that's a shocker, Amy. I'm glad I was sitting down when you told me that.
But this was the coda to the study that was kind of interesting. in countries with more equal childcare leave, parental policies where that's sort of a little more of a thing than it is in the US, sleep is more equal. So like what happens, so the sort of workplace policies trickle down
Yeah,
to what's
that makes
happening in your
sense.
house when
And
the
I will say
policies are
this
better.
has equalized in my marriage tremendously, and in fact, the balance have shifted completely the other way now that the kids are older. So
Mm,
my husband tends to wake up at 5:30 or 6 just naturally, and he can't go back to sleep. If I didn't set an alarm, I mean, back in the good old days, I could sleep until afternoon, but now, I mean, I can sleep until 8:39, easily. And so he tends to get less sleep than I do now. Judd Apatow, I'll see if I can find it and link to it. He has a funny routine that's like on TikTok, it's going around. And he says that his whole relationship with his wife now is who slept worse. Like that every morning.
Right.
And they're older, so they're getting more into the thing of like, we can't sleep because we're older.
right. You get up early.
And but it's a whole bit where it's like, oh, I woke up at 2, had to pee. I went to the bathroom. Then I thought I heard something outside. I went out. Then my back was killing me. So I decided to sleep in the chair. And she's like, oh, really? Because what happened to me was, and they're just having like endless conversations about who slept worse.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah.
So you're exhausted, and that actually leads to dissatisfaction. Like it's why this is happening, and you're tired for a long time when you have kids. Like, of course, the newborn stuff gets easier, but the getting up too early, and the kids don't know that it's Sunday morning, and so they're up at 6:15 on Sunday mornings too. Like that continues for several years. So the sort of dissatisfaction, right, that you're sort of stewing in sticks around for a long time. Not forever,
And
but a long
let's
time.
name it. The resentments that you start to build during the bad times also last for a long time, or can last for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
And my husband finally learned, I think, not to ever utter the phrase "I'm tired" in a 5-year span, because let me tell you,
Because he wasn't allowed to be tired.
he was
He
not
wasn't allowed to say
be
that.
tired.
You
He would just
cornered
be
the
like,
market.
"Oh, I'm tired," and I'm like, "Tired," and I would just that was it. It was like hitting the magic button. "Oh, you're tired, is it?" And I would be
Himself
off
is
to the
tired.
races. It must be terrible. Oh. But we were recording an episode after the summer when I was babysitting for my niece and nephew. Niece, 2 years old, who would wake up at 5:30 a.m., like raring to go.
Yeah.
And I had been up until, 10:30 or 11, getting my own kids down who are older and whatever. And let me tell you, this sense memory of a kid waking up at 5:30 when it's still dark outside, and the first thought in your head is, I got 18 hours to go. Like, I'm
Right.
not going back to sleep until 11 p.m.
Right. Maybe I could make it 10. Maybe I could roll up.
Oh.
Tonight it's going to be 9:15
And
for
then
sure.
the thing that I do every time, which is by 9 o'clock, I'm like, all right, as long as the little ones are down, like you bigs do whatever you want, I'm going to bed. I get in bed and I'm like, finally some peace to scroll my phone until 11:30 at night and start the madness again. But the number one thing it brought back to me was the tiredness. I mean, God bless you if you're in it. I remember saying at some point, and I had 3 and, I had 3 kids, each 18 months apart. And when my 2-year-old started sleeping well, and then she was going to daycare, the other one was in kindergarten and preschool, and I would occasionally drop them off, go back to sleep for an hour and a half. I always say it was like Dorothy walking into Oz. Like my world went from this like very gray space to like, oh yeah, this is what laughter feels
And
like.
you
This is
realize
how
right.
food tastes. Like I could not believe how deadened I was all the time.
So there's 2 other things that sleep, lack of sleep can lead to. One is lack of communication, specifically because you're tired. You don't feel like chatting. I just had this with my spouse last night. We just got back from a trip overseas, and so we're on the weird, time zone thing. So we both felt fine. And then all of a sudden it was 9 p.m. and I just hit a wall, and he came into the kitchen and like dared to strike up chit chat
No.
with me about how my day went.
No, how
About
dare
like, so
he?
how'd that
That
thing
monster.
go? And I just was like, I don't know. And I caught myself and said, I just hit a wall. I'm really tired. And he said, okay, me too. We went to bed.
God bless. I will say there are some downsides of the long-term marriage. The best part of it is that I can say to my husband, do me a favor, don't talk to me for the rest of the night. And it's just like, he's like, got it. And we can just leave
It's
each
okay.
other alone. It
Right.
doesn't, we don't fight. Or he comes in and he's like, so, I was looking at our banking information. And I'm like, nope.
Not, yeah.
Let's
the
do it
store's
Saturday
closed.
morning, maybe over
Right.
some, Danishes, but I can't. I'm too tired.
But the problem is when you're always tired,
there's
then
never
there is no
Saturday
right time
morning
to talk about that
Danishes.
stuff, or like I wanted to bring something up or whatever. And so then these things that you needed to talk about, whether they're logistical or emotional, can sort of, fester, and resentments can grow because there is never a good
can
time
they,
to talk
Amy?
about the
Can
hard
they?
stuff.
Yes, you're right. They can.
Right?
Indeed.
And then the last thing is that there's a Chuck Berry song called "Too Pooped to Pop." Have you?
We say it all the time in our family.
Yeah.
It's an expression.
Well,
My parents used to say that. I'm too pooped to pop.
Too pooped to pop. Well, I was going to use it to mean like, to be euphemistic. But yeah, when you're tired all the time, you're too pooped to pop. That is not great for a relationship.
And also physically, if you
Right.
have, I had 3 kids under 4. I had someone clutching me or pawing at me all day long. And
Right.
the idea of any form of romantic interaction was, let's just say, appalling to me.
Your experience, right, of being touched had changed profoundly. And once again, your partners had not. Right. And so your needs are really being met 500%. And there's like, it went to 500% people touching me for you, and maybe, down to 0 for the other person who's out of the house and comes home and is like, what, and the rules have changed.
Yeah, it does. The biology of that, sometimes we talk about biological imperatives and how they make things so much clearer and they really help things make sense.
Mm-hmm. If it's supposed to be happening, right? There's a reason this is happening. And so therefore,
this
right.
biological imperative is a mystery to me. Like, why don't men experience like a giant, whatever it would be, testosterone drop or something in the year after a child is born? Because I guess because their only job, it's not because biology doesn't recognize monogamy. That's why, because their job is to go out and have then kids with 86 other people. It's not to leave their poor, tired wife alone for a year.
Right. Well, so there's one response to all of this that's always the go-to, like you need to do this when your marriage has lost its luster after kids.
Oh, I know what you're going to say, and my head will pop.
I'm not even going to say
I will not be too pooped to pop. I will start screaming in rage.
Okay. So here's what we're not going to tell you, because it's like, so what works? What should you do when you feel like your angry partner's at the daycare?
Can I tell you what it is? Because I already know. Date night.
Go on a date night. Just go on a date night.
Horrible.
Right. You're exhausted. Your partner's exhausted. You're filled with resentment. You're going to pay a babysitter and like blow dry your hair and go to an expensive restaurant so you can
sit there and stare at each other and be like, I'm tired.
Right.
And then you think the entire time, I think I know how this ends and I really just want to go to sleep.
Right.
Terrible.
It doesn't, and then this pressure of like, this was supposed to be amazing. This is supposed to bring the romance back and we're doing it every Wednesday. It doesn't always go so well. It didn't for us. We never really stuck to it. Like, we're like, we should have a date night. And then
I can remember a meal. I think my sister-in-law had come in town to help with the kids. And she was like, you guys go out. I can picture, we were at a restaurant called Asia that I'm sure doesn't exist anymore in, can't remember what part of California it's called, outside of LA. It's called like, not Glendale. Anyway, doesn't matter. I'm sure the restaurant's not there anymore. But we loved this restaurant before this was our first baby. And we went and we just were like joylessly like shoving this food that we used to love like into our mouths. And like I was having trouble keeping my eyes open and it was cold. I was freezing and it was misery. It was like everything that reminded me, all it served to do was remind me of what was lost, like even this is taken from me. Even this wonderful sushi restaurant called Asia that I used to love.
Doesn't even taste good to me anymore because I'm too tired.
It was torture.
Yeah.
Awful.
I think that the date night thing, it occurs to me that the date night thing, I understand what it's going for, but it's not working. And I think there's another way to come at it. So I'm going to suggest that you could like take the date night expectations like way down and do the parts and do the 2 parts that are useful, that are sort of why you're doing it. All right. The first one is leaving the house, right? Like leaving the kitchen that's a mess that you're standing in fighting about. But that could be as easy as like going in your backyard for 20 minutes after the baby goes to sleep. Like just changing where you're existing together to not be in it. Like go for a walk around the block. It doesn't have to be Le Bernardin, right? To be worthwhile. It's just go somewhere else than you usually are. Particularly for the parent who's like at home all the time with the kids, if there is one who's staying at home. Right? Like just move your relationship to a different location. You have a nice backyard. I don't really have a backyard in New York City, but I do have a block to walk around, and to do that is useful. Just change it up.
I'm not sure if that's interesting to me. I'm going to tell you the one thing that really worked for us. Mm-hmm. Because for me, I think that you have to identify like what's wrong. Like sit and have that conversation.
For sure.
And for me, what was wrong was being too tired. That was always, it wasn't that like I'm too much in the house, because I took the kids out every day. We were at parks. Like I didn't care about standing in the backyard. I didn't care about going to a restaurant. My presenting issue was tired, and I had some postpartum anxiety, and I had a lot of sleep problems around that. And so I was like level 10 tired. I was so tired. And I would like fall asleep with like the kids literally like playing on my head. I mean, it was misery. And so we strategized around, I cut back on breastfeeding, which I'm going to say, not a doctor, but I needed to. I could not keep up nighttime feedings and get up with a 3 and a 2-year-old in the morning. And so I did a mix of breastfeeding and formula. And 2 nights a week, my husband got up and gave the baby a bottle instead of me. And I would sleep through, and I would put silicone. We had a tiny house. We had 2 rooms. It was 900 square feet. If I could have, I would have gone to a completely separate bedroom. It's like, this is my night off. My only job tonight is to try to sleep for 9 hours. The other thing we would do is we called them sleep-in Saturdays. Saturday morning, non-negotiable. My husband couldn't do work stuff. Saturday mornings, my husband got up with all 3 kids and took them out of the house until noon, and I slept that whole time.
But if this is about improving relationships, I mean, I guess what you're saying is what needed to improve your relationship is that you needed to sleep more. That was what was needed to improve your relationship.
Yeah, like me dragging my zombie carcass to like a restaurant had no bearing. Right. It solved 0 of my problems.
But did your relationship issues and resentments, did they improve once you were getting more sleep?
I just think every single part, my parenting improved. Like I was not functioning. I was so tired.
Right.
And, luckily I had a partner who saw that and said, okay, let's make a plan around this. But if that person is not your partner, like call a friend. I've gone to people's houses and spent the night at their house when they had little babies. And it's like, I'll get up and feed the baby. I mean, if you are at a point where you're like a little tired and you could do an afternoon nap, fine. But I needed 9 straight hours of sleep at a certain point to just start to right the ship. And I think that solving the problems is so much more important than like the Instagram advice of like, here's me and my husband and our baby by the pool in Las Vegas sipping champagne. Like if that's not solving your problem, don't do it.
No, but this is about like actually like working on what date night gives you to the ability to do is it removes you from the situation, right? Like that's why there is a date night. And so removing yourself from your usual situation with your spouse to talk about the issues in your relationship or where are we going for Thanksgiving? Or how did that thing go you told me about a couple weeks ago? Like, it doesn't really matter what you're talking about. It's communication with your spouse needs to occur. And it's much more likely to occur if you're not in your usual
All right, that makes sense
environment.
to me. I think we were so far off the train that it was like, we need to like,
Right. You needed
we need to
the
stop
hierarchy of
the
needs was the
ship from
ground floor.
sinking before we can talk about how to sail it better, right?
Right.
But then I do think that, like, we found for us that Friday nights became like take-in nights. You know, we lived in LA. There was a lot of great food. And that was our night to, like, get a yummy take-in meal, especially when this is more when we had little kids. Like, and I'm tired of the meal where, like, I try to make something and 2 kids are crying because they don't want it. Just to have a night where it was like, this is our night to eat what we want and do what we want, and carving that time out. And the other thing is, we had, in the 9 months that we were together without kids, we watched a lot of movies, and quickly we were like, oh, movies are no longer working for us at all. Like, there is no point in us sitting in the dark for 2 hours and not talking. Like, if we do get time together, we want to be talking.
Right.
But for us, taking food was better for that. It was like, we didn't have to pay the sitter. We could spend that money on, like, nicer takeout and get some good sushi. And yeah, like, put the kids in front of a movie and sit and eat. And I think that what I'm saying is, like, what this solution looks like for you, you really have to think about what the problems look like.
The other thing that gets in the way of communication, I think, because you are tired, is that nothing works except, I used to watch mindless television. This was 20 years ago when I had a baby. Now I would be scrolling my phone and watching mindless television. And there are times when that really is all you can do, and it's extremely satisfying. And I certainly do plenty of, like, that with my spouse, but we're also at a time in our parenting lives where if we need to talk about stuff, we have time to do so.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing about the date night. Like, if you're both sitting scrolling your phones at Le Bernardin, there's some part of you that's like, oh, this is a little weird. We're not really supposed to be doing this while we're sitting here. We're supposed to be looking at each other and talking to each other. And again, I don't think you need, like, a babysitter in a restaurant to create how about for half an hour, we're just going to put our phones away and just talk, just listen to music, whatever. Just don't fill it with the
baby rattle, as we call it. Yeah,
the baby rattle.
Yeah, I have to have something to do. And I think that the biggest answer, and it certainly was for us, is, as you say, same team. And as Lynetta Willis, who we reference maybe more than any other guest ever on this podcast, says, get on the same side of the net as the problem. And those are the times when my husband and I could be really deep in the mess and laughing together about, like, what have we done to our lives? This was a huge mistake. And, like, these people are animals who we live with, and they're horrible. We don't, that those are the moments. And even I find now with teenagers, I have a kid who just has a really hard time in the morning, always has lots of temper tantrums in the morning. And I was really noticing this morning that the siblings and everybody was sort of like, at some point he was yelling at us all, calm down, this morning. And we just got kind of laughing. His brother was like, you're literally the only person screaming in the house, and you're screaming the words calm down. And we just were able to kind of all, now it's like the 4 of us, my husband's out of town, myself and the 3 kids, against the problem of, like, this kid's angry morning rages, where we were all kind of laughing at it together. Not laughing at the kid doing it, because that's not a good solution, but figuring out ways to connect with your partner against the problem is so much better and hard. Listen, I mean, I failed this test a billion times.
If you're in this season with your partner, it seems to me like this could be a good way in to talk about this study. Like, we can link to some of the things we talked about today and just say, like, did you know that, like, lack of sleep actually causes communication problems within a marriage? I mean, it seems so obvious, but when you stop and think about it, it could be a way in to talk about it as something that just happens. It just occurs. It's not nobody's fault. It's not why do you never. It's just like, wow, we were in this season and turns out there's reasons for it, and it maybe gives you a reason to talk about it. And sort of, so I thought we should really try to set aside time to do this once a week, whatever.
And I think
Not
there
the
are
date night
moments
stuff.
that you can identify. I was once I was waiting for my husband to get off a plane. It was when we were really newly married. Now I'm like, take an Uber,
Mhm.
dude, I'm busy. But I was
Right.
waiting for him at the airport. And a guy came off the plane before me, and his wife was waiting with me. And as he walked up, she was like, "You're late, and and I have these 10 things to do." And she just was like laying into him right away. And I was maybe a newlywed, or maybe we were still dating. And I can remember being like, oh, I would never be like that to my husband. Surprise, surprise, cut to 10 years later. And I need 6 eggs. And also, like, the second
Mhm.
I see my husband, I tend to be like, you left that part of the sink in the bathroom and you did it. And here is like a list of your faults that I've been waiting to tell you about for the last 9 hours while you've been like golfing or doing whatever.
Yeah.
And I have found that for me, like finding those times, like the greeting times tends to be a time to like go for connection and realize that we can have that conversation about the things, all of his many sins, later. But that I have tried, and it was really funny because someone in the Facebook group wrote, and they were like, Margaret, I tried your thing of smiling at my husband when he walks in the door. And he was like, what are you doing? What's wrong? What's wrong with you? He was like, why are you smiling at me? It's creepy.
Right.
But I do think that when you can do a little bit of work around like, when does this get really bad? Maybe it's the first hour of the morning. Maybe it's the first time you see each other, and try to remember, like, how can we fix this together? Like, we got married because we liked each other. We had kids because we wanted them. And this isn't something that happened to us. So maybe we could fix it together.
There these bids for connection can be ridiculously small. Like, set
Yes.
the bar low. Like, that shirt looks good on you. Like, that's a place to start if
Yes.
you're really stuck in
Thank
angry
you.
partners at the
Thank you
daycare.
for doing that. How was your
Right.
day? Like
Right.
very simple
Start small, guys.
things, because I think we get a bad rap. I'm speaking for like heterosexual stay-at-home women of like, the shrew with the baby on the hip. But like,
Right.
we maybe have some role to like let go of that a little bit and be like, okay, I'm going to choose connection first. And then I'm going to like address real problems that I need real support with. I'm not going to skip that part.
Right. Right. You solved it.
We solved marriages, guys, so don't worry about it anymore. It's all set. Friends, we have an exciting development. As you know, Amy and I are not only the hosts of this podcast, but we have a podcast network of our own filled with shows for women and moms, and it is called Catalyst Media. We want you to visit our website, which we just redesigned. It's new and
It
improved.
looks so good.
It
It's
looks
such a pretty website.
amazing. And you can find all of the shows that are in our network there. And that is at ADALYST, catalystmedia.com. Please check out and subscribe to all of our shows and enjoy your listening experience.
Well said. Yeah, we love all these shows. And some of them will be familiar
Yeah,
to you, and
lots
some of them might be
familiar.
new. Yeah, and we hope you enjoy them all. And with that, Hellions, we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening.